I'm Stephanie Kahn. Welcome to Friend of a Friend. I like to say that on this podcast, I talk to my friends who make art, who make music, who make beautiful lives. Well, today's guest is no exception, except his point of view is a little bit different. He's a musician and an ethnomusicologist, and he writes about the musicians of Bahia de Brasil who are trying to earn a living from their music. He's Jeff Packman. That's music by Samba De Farofa from Salvador, Brazil. I first met Jeff Packman when I was at graduate school. He stepped in to take over a course called Sound Studies, and he turned out to be brilliant at leading us through that material. But almost more importantly, he was unfailingly kind and unpretentious. Jeff's now Associate Professor and Associate Dean of Graduate Studies at the Faculty of Music, University of Toronto. But for years before that, Jeff was a professional drummer in and around Los Angeles. But then he got interested in the music of Bahia de Brasil and immersed himself in that musical cultural scene, getting to know the working musicians. His book is called Living from Music in Bahia, Professional Musicians, Popular Music, and the Capital of Afro-Brazil. Here's our conversation. Jeff, welcome to Friend of a Friend.
Thanks very much.
I wish we were in person, like at the Duke of York with a pint or something.
That would be very appropriate, yeah.
Yeah, that would be more typical. But anyway, we're doing it on Zoom today.
Which is timely. I in some ways, I guess.
It's not going away.
Yeah. Well, and that makes us current, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's very cool. In ethnomusicology, there's this thing about being bi-musical. You play the music as well as studying it. Obviously, it's the best way in. But I was wondering, for you, what came first, the kind of the studiousness, or were you always playing music all along, or what was your way in?
I think they kind of went parallel. The music thing goes back as far as I can remember. I'll date myself a little bit, but I used to watch The Partridge Family. But I remember when I was a kid, preschool and kindergarten and stuff like that, we had our little play band. And then I started taking guitar lessons when I was about 6.
That's a good age to start.
It's a good age and it's not a good age because, this is a long time ago, so pedagogy was very different back then. And my parents weren't musicians. My grandmother was, but I didn't really practice much. I'd sort of go to the lesson and play and stuff. And at a certain point, the teacher kind of said, maybe he's a little young. But right after that, the thing that happened was the Nashville Symphony, which is where I was living at the time. They had this program where they sent members of the symphony out to all the public schools in town. And I saw this kid walking around with his violin case and thought that was just so cool. But then it turned out, here's the really funny thing, is it turned out it wasn't a violin in his case, it was a viola.
Oh, and not cool. Not cool.
Well, I thought that was totally cool.
Yeah. I'm joking. It's the joke about violas.
There are a lot of violists in the academy. I don't know what.
Well, the viola is like the alto. Like we're doing the middle lines, the inner lines, and they're not as easy at first as the melody, right? Or the bass even.
But the one chip on my shoulder about viola is the clef. So I learned to read this ridiculous clef that has nothing to do with nothing.
You can't ever use it again.
No.
Unless you do medieval music, and then it's like, I know alto clef, so I'm good.
Yeah. And so many years later, went back to get myself set up to go back to grad school and stuff. I was close to starting from scratch, Then what's even funnier is further down the road in Berkeley, they had us reading like multiple staves and they'd include alto clef. And then it was, by that point, I was fully indoctrinated to, treble and bass clef. So always like betwixt in between, which in a lot of ways, that's the story of my life, is sort of in between stuff. It's interesting. There's something to be said for being in the liminal space.
In the liminal spaces. Yeah.
We got to get the academic thing in, right? So.
Right, of course. Wait, so when you were playing in bands in LA, you were playing, by then it was drums. Yeah, that's what I thought.
So I was doing viola and then I changed schools. The guy who was the band director was also the orchestra director. I told him I was interested in drums too. And he's like, well, we really need you to play viola. He goes, I'll tell you what, if you'll stay in the orchestra and play viola, I'll help you get started on drums. And then I had the neighbor down the street. His name was Brian. I think he's still like a producer in Nashville. And I used to go and like watch him play his drums and thought it was really cool. And at one point, he got a new drum set. And honest to goodness, he came to my house with his old drum set and loaned me his drums for like 6 or 8 months.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
That's so nice.
Oh my God. And it was this beautiful, like I'll never forget it. It was this beautiful chrome over wood set of Slingerlands. Really great, like not cheesy drums, really, really nice drums.
Just getting access to an instrument can be the barrier, right? But I mean, for a kid, a drum set, that's expensive.
Oh, crazy. I just think about like that kind of a gesture too. I mean, that's just amazing.
Very kind. So I think we frequented some of the same clubs in LA at different times, but I was in the audience and I just wondered then, and I'm trying to get to what your work is about because you were like a working musician in that scene. What was that like? It seems like a tough scene to me.
Yeah, it's unbelievably tough. You know, I was a working player, but I never was free of having a day job. And I was thinking about that this morning. Most of the people I knew had something. A lot of them taught. And then there were a very few who could do nothing but like the gigs they wanted to do.
I think it was a great experience, but it gave you real boots on the ground experience of what you ended up writing about, which is
Oh yeah.
just because we're going to tell people about it. One of the fundamental things about your work is that you're not studying the stars or the standouts. You're studying like working musicians, right? They think of themselves probably as musical workers, or what is their attitude about
Yeah.
music?
Well, I mean, people would identify themselves, or like when you talk to people, like you meet somebody and they say, I play guitar or I play bass or something like that. And then, you know, I'd ask them like, what do you do? And they'd say, well, I live from music.
Would you say that's hard or harder than living for music in somewhere like LA or Toronto or?
Well, I mean, the thing about Salvador, none of the people I worked with have it easy. It's very gig to gig, and it's ebbs and flows, and you know, it's unstable and political. But the thing is that Salvador has a ton of live music. Plus, it's known for it in a different kind of way than even someplace like Rio or Sao Paulo or Los Angeles or New York are. And so they'll have music to go along with dining and like in the hotels. And then there's the big stuff, you know, there's Carnival and the Festas Juninas and stuff that are the peaks where people, if you'll play that music and you hustle, there's work to be had.
You just said like there's a lot of music going on if you're willing to play that music or if you can play that music. And I remember you mentioning that many of the musicians, you know, actually move between circuits, like they don't play only one style of music. So can you talk a bit more about that? Like,
yeah, well, it's interesting because so I did the music trade school in LA. A lot of what it taught was versatility. If you want to work, you should be able to do different things because very few people get to do only one or two things.
okay, yeah.
You know, that was one of my bugaboos when I was studying is that I was terrible at playing Brazilian music and
What?
I struggled with that because it was so far from my radar growing up playing rock tunes in Texas.
Yeah.
So the only way that I'd say 90% of the people I knew could support themselves was being able to move between rock gigs and jazz gigs. And even like some of the very top folks that I knew, my roommate Toss, he worked a lot with kind of a first call studio guitar player named Mike Landau. I mean, he's recorded with Joni Mitchell and he's all over YouTube and stuff. He's just a brilliant, brilliant guitarist who, funny enough, always has had his original rock band. And then he'd go and do these huge sessions. And like, I mean, you can't have listened to 90s and 2000s pop rock radio and not heard Mike. He would still talk about work the way that even the folks that I knew talked about work, which was like, you know, yeah, man, I'm going to England to go play with these pop bozos. And it turns out that the pop bozos that he was playing with happened to be performing at Wembley Stadium.
Oh.
But still, you know, there were the things that he wanted to do, and then there were things that he would get called to do. And so when I got to grad school and started reading about all these people, and they talked about so many of these musicians like that was all they did. I just played bebop, just play samba.
I'm wondering if this perception of people playing only one kind, which is what I think a lot of people would have in their heads, is it come from this sort of romanticizing of music as being like an art that, you're an artist, you're like creating a sort of 19th century romantic view. Not that it's a trade, and to be good at a trade, you can't say I only make doors and I'm a carpenter. Like, and not wanting to commodify or like associate art and economics, which is to our detriment, right? Because it's very hard to get paid to play
Right.
music.
I agree 100%. Again, it's sort of this confluence of things. It's everything that you said. I think it's also by the time somebody gets to be a star, at that point, not only are you allowed to only do that thing, but
Right.
you're sort of expected to. And if you venture too far from what everybody expects you to do, then your devoted fan base very often gets grumpy.
Uh-huh.
And then there's always the pigeonholing thing too, where they sort of think, even like some of the top players now, they'll go, well, oh, Stephanie, she can only sing, Cape Breton folk tunes, right?
Right, right. I'm like,
You sort of forget
what?
that you nail Queen, right?
Oh yeah, right. I forgot about that.
Right. Or the other side of it is, somebody would go to those shows and see you sing that stuff and go, wait, you can sing this other stuff.
Right.
So there's that. And so you see a lot of people sort of working against character because the expectation is that somebody's going to be true to their art, like you were saying. So there's that
Yeah.
piece. And then, yeah, I think that, 19th century romantic separate art and is another
Money,
thing.
yeah, yeah. And also, and it's something that you write about in all places, but in Brazil, I keep trying to bring it back to
Yeah.
genres have different statuses, right? I mean, I don't know what they all are. I mean, I was somehow a grading assistant for you, and I'm like struggling. But I know that some genres, and it maybe, I don't know if it's to do with the African influence in Brazil or what, but some things are worth more than others. There's a politics to that too.
Totally. And I mean, again, so like one of the things that I say is that there are the particularities for Salvador, but hopefully a lot of the stuff that I talk about resonates with scenes in lots of other places. And so that was part of the impetus for doing the project. I didn't know what I was going to find when I got there. I just knew what my experience, in LA was all these people moving between different music. And then at certain points, they could kind of do their thing. And then writing against so much of the ethno literature that seemed to cast people as specialists and sort of overlook the fact that they were doing it for a living or
Right.
romanticizing that they weren't doing it for a living. So when I went to Salvador, I had heard a fair bit of music that had come out of there from pretty high level people, but always sort of thinking like, okay, so who plays bass on that recording by Daniela Mercury? Or who played drums on that? And very often they're not credited at all. And then as I started to get to know people, the other thing that they would always say, there was the I live from music, vivo de música. And then they'd say, temos que tocar tudo. We have to play everything. And, that really sort of hit the versatility kind of question. And then what I started noticing is I had kind of what had drawn me into being interested in Salvador in particular was this music called axé, party music. And it's what gets played during carnival. Related to that was this music that came out of these groups called the Blocos Afros. They're these carnival groups that did all this political activism and stuff. And I really loved, in particular, one group's music. But what I started to find out was that the attitudes of the people who live in Salvador and the musicians themselves toward Axé in particular was not what I had expected. The first time I went down there, I remember I made friends with the guy who worked at the front desk at the hotel because he was a musician and a surfer. So
Oh,
we
perfect.
clicked on multiple levels. But, I would ask, so, I want to go see Oladun. And they're like, yeah. And then I'd ask about some of these other big stars that I knew, particularly from Axé, and everybody would kind of curl their nose up at it. And they go, why you want to check that out? But starting from there, what I realized is that Axé in particular, and then a related Bahian music called pagode, which is also played during carnival, you can make a lot of money playing those if you get in a high level band, especially during the carnival season. And what I found out is that music across the board with musicians and audiences, they go, yeah, it's okay to dance to and stuff like that. But they say it's not really good music. I mean, the words are stupid and the harmony is really simple and the arrangements are just sort of repetitive and boring, but it's fine for a party. And a lot of people would go, but I'd never buy it or play it at home. What I really like, and for musicians, what I play and what I really value is what they call Música Popular Brasileira, or MPB. It's a really broad, eclectic label for stuff that kind of comes on the heels of bossa nova and tropicalia. So, and I should say, I mean, I'm speaking in generalities here. So like a
Yeah.
lot of what I do is sort of based on like, this was the dominant tendency that I saw. I mean, it really is. It's great music. I can't deny any of that, but it appeals to a certain kind of sensibility. You know, it leans hard on the poetic lyrics, very often with multiple meaning and stuff like that, because a lot of it is tied into the dictatorship. When like people that had more of a political agenda, they had to disguise what they were saying to avoid getting censored or worse. Coming out of bossa nova, you know, it draws on more elaborated harmonies and things like that. It's really sort of, you know, more cerebral music. So, you know, I
But
think,
it doesn't make them as much money. Is that it?
right. Yeah. And well, and the thing is, you know, I mean, think about like in North America, like if you want to play jazz, I mean, if you want to play like bebop, or if you want to play stuff that's really open and all that kind of stuff, I mean, if you're lucky in Toronto, you go book a gig at the Rex. And if you have a following, people will come see you.
And you pass the hat at the end of it, I
Right.
think.
But if you want to get paid, well, that's not what you're going to be playing. If you want to play jazz, then you're going to want to play stuff that, you know, at weddings. So, you know, sort of, you know, kind of stuff that people can foxtrot to. And that's even out the window. You know, you got to play top 40 dance tunes and stuff, which a lot of the musicians roll their eyes about. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very similar. So there are a couple of challenges with MPB. One is that it's not necessarily that accessible for people who can't appreciate the lyrics and can't relate to the harmony. Some of it sounds rather dissonant. It can. It's all over the place. I mean, it's really eclectic.
And the tourists wouldn't get it as much because it's in Portuguese, right? So, I mean, the other stuff is got a beat and a fun tune, and you can enjoy it anyway.
You can latch onto it. A typical way that people listen to music in Salvador is by dancing to it and by singing along with it. People dance to MPB, but that's not its primary draw. The primary draw is, you know, more sort of the cerebral kind of stuff. It's more thoughtful music. And that's one of the things that Farofa, who's my main person that I write about, like the consummate working musician in Salvador, he talks about, you know, there's music for the head, music for the heart, and music for the waist or the butt. And it's really true. And in a lot of ways, that's the hierarchy. And that's where the African thing, where it really plays in. Because if you think about, you know, back to those 19th century musical values and all that kind of stuff, you know, the great work, what we're interested in is what was Beethoven, you know, as a hero, what was he thinking in his head?
I was just thinking a lot of those, like Bach was very much a working musician trying, like he kept changing gigs to get a better deal or a better, you know, I mean, it's hard to know about Beethoven, but I think they were also probably more practical than we give them credit for.
Oh, I have absolutely no doubt they were.
We know Mozart was because we have all his diaries. Yeah, the cerebral, the head, heart, bum thing. Do you think there's probably a race issue as well, right? In the fun dance music is also related to more the Black communities or the...
Yeah, I mean, in Salvador, Brazil, they talk about mixture and you know that we have a little bit of European culture, a little bit of indigenous culture, a little bit of Afro culture. Salvador is thought of as the most African city in Brazil. And that's why, you know, the capital of Afro Brazil and all that. And Carnival is very much about African heritage and things like that. During Carnival, you cut loose and you dance and you party. What I think about is if you just go back to, you know, Enlightenment thinking and, you know, our buddy Rene Descartes, you know, I think, therefore I am. We privilege the mind. That's what's valued, and everything else is of the body. And if you think about sort of, you know, racialist discourse and gender discourse too, and I think that's the underpinning way of politicking in music. Things that were othered historically in Western culture have been associated with the body, with playfulness and things like that. And, you know, that's not seriousness and all of this kind of stuff.
But it's valued for its economic, I mean, it brings the tourists in and everything, right? I was thinking about one of your tough questions you would bring up is like, who's in, who's out, who gets to decide? That's one of your lines, but it's such a good question. And it's hard enough when I'm looking at like traditional practices to say who are the gatekeepers. But when you throw in labor practices and economics, it just goes through the roof, right?
Oh yeah. And it's also, it's who's in and who's out where.
Right? Because, or what, in what circumstances? Yeah.
Exactly. So, it always makes me think about like, the boundary, sort of the gatekeeping, like you were saying. And
I hate that word in a way because I don't want to call anybody that I know in a scene a gatekeeper, but there are
yeah,
definitely people that are looked to and people who should maybe be looked to but aren't, but there's reasons why. And
gatekeeper makes it sound a little too conspiratorial.
but I
Yeah.
mean, when you're talking about a musical economy, sorry, I don't know why I didn't
Mhm.
have the noun there. Um, it's totally different, right? Because, well, there's what people are valuing for money or for being able to make a club profitable. This is a band, it gets people in, the band gets paid well because the people came in, it's carnival, all these things. It's what we put on our posters for Come See Brazil. That's all valued. But what is their life or would they like to be playing a different kind? Or I mean, I'm just rambling now.
But you kind of put your finger on why making a living as a musician is so complicated.
You also had a great line about people. Oh, they give performances of their musical work selves, you said.
So that's how musicians get work, is they build reputations by getting out and playing, but also by talking about what they do and by meeting
Mm-hmm.
people, doing the whole networking thing that, again, we do all the time. Think about your LinkedIn profile or something
Oh,
like that,
please
right? I
no.
mean,
It's not
maybe you
doing me any favors. Maybe I need to take a page from their books.
might, yeah, figure out what people value and make you someone that, they want to work with. I mean, I think that's where it plays in. And that's why I actually use self, is to sort of think about what these folks do. It's not just a superficial thing, because I mean, your taste and what you enjoy playing and all that stuff is very deeply felt. And then we're also disciplined in certain ways to value certain things. And so there's this assumption that people who play good music are good musicians, and then good musicians play good music. So there's kind of this tautology, right? And where it all gets messed up is when you get to the very, very high echelons. At that point, people think about you differently. But when you're down in the trenches, part of this whole performing musical selves thing that I get into is people trying to demonstrate that they're good musicians and good to work with based on their knowledge of quote unquote good music. The irony in all of that is that, well, as an example here, just because you can play Beethoven does not mean that you can play well with Taylor Swift.
Right.
They're different skill sets. In my book, a really good musician can do a good job in either or both of those. But in terms of
Mm-hmm.
making a living, you have to balance out that stuff to avoid getting pigeonholed. You get
Right.
strongly associated with less valuable music, then you can't necessarily find like the year-round stuff, because MPB and samba and
Mm-hmm.
other kinds of music, those are the things that you can work more steadily at in Salvador, but they're not what are featured during the seasonal peaks.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you get too strongly even associated with MPB, you won't necessarily find music playing in the big peaks where you can make money. So it's
Right.
really complicated, but they're sort of navigating between, I mean, this is where we get all sort of theoretical, is moving between economic capital, what you get paid for, and
Mm-hmm.
cultural capital, which is what's sort of valued as being of good taste, and then social capital, who that can sort of help you out and navigate your career, and then how you balance all those things. And that's where the performances of work selves comes to play.
Right. What we haven't mentioned when you're down there and you're talking to people and you're going to the scenes and you're playing sometimes or whatever, we haven't told people that you're like a 6'4" white guy. Do you think that worked for you or against you? Because sometimes people like to talk to outsiders, right?
Yeah, I'd say by and large it absolutely worked for me, to the
Mm-hmm.
point where, one of the people that I worked with, his favorite music to play, interestingly enough, was heavy metal.
Oh,
So again,
wow.
I just say that to say that I've grossly oversimplified. And we
No
we
way.
didn't talk about samba, but Farofa's playing in Samba De Farofa, and that's what he's
Right.
always wanted to do. And samba has a different status because it's a national music. So it's like, as it gets back to me being, yeah, a 6'4" white guy. It was this guitarist. His name is Shimbia. At one point, he looked at me and he goes, Jeff, if you were from here, you could not do this. You couldn't do this kind of work for lots of reasons, but not the least of which is the really nasty and sort of humbling thing is, I was granted a lot of access because, in fact, I'm a white guy and the specter of colonialism is just
Oh.
there.
Did they
And
think maybe ever that you could help get like the truth out or their stories or something?
yeah, so there is that part, and I do. I mean, you have a
Yeah.
recording of Samba de Farofa. Is Jeff, can you get us help getting gigs up there? A lot of people, they would ask like, can you get us work in California? And So I try to do that stuff. But yeah, I think for some folks, there was that hope because they've had that experience. I mean, Michael Jackson came to Salvador, David Byrne came to Salvador, Paul
Right.
Simon, but I'm not them. Then there's more mundane stuff like, getting instruments. We were talking before about just access to instruments, especially if they're not made in Brazil, are unbelievably expensive and hard to get there, especially in Salvador. I helped a guy get a DW drum set, really expensive, high-end drum manufacturer from California. And he had
Okay.
read about it in the magazines and stuff, and he just wanted this. And I mean, literally, it would have cost as much as a house down there. What was it? Remember Songbird Music in Toronto?
Yeah.
They had this used, very nice DW drum set that they helped me get for this guy that we put on a
That's
boat,
great.
and it got down there like 4 months. It was unbelievably difficult, and unfortunately the drums got damaged on the way down, but the guy was happy as a clam. But I mean, more on a basic level, like every time I go, I come with a stack of drum heads and guitar strings and stick, kind of give to friends. And so there's a little bit of that kind of thing, what they can get for it. And then honestly, in relation to like the social capital thing and all of that, I suspect, I don't know, but like when I started doing this as I was a graduate student, they didn't necessarily say, Jeff is a graduate student. They'd say he's a musician from California.
That's
And
probably
so,
more cred for you, right?
well, and for them, I
Oh,
mean,
I
I
see.
don't want to make it so instrumental, but I think that there's a part of that. So yeah, at the end of the day, there's no question that, who I am and how I map and stuff, it allowed me to do certain things. I want to think that it actually helped some folks out too, and I try to give back to them. But yeah, a lot of humbling experiences in relation to that. I think that, there was a certain amount of they sort of felt obligated to treat us in particular ways. I don't think it was insincere. I just think that stuff is mapped onto their way of being. And when that finally occurred to me, it was like getting hit in the head. Because, it's sort of being awakened to the privilege that you have.
It adds a whole other layer. It doesn't diminish the kindness or the friendliness of the people that you know, but it
Not at
gives you
all.
a
I would never step away from saying that they're incredibly kind, generous to a
Mhm.
fault. Farofa in particular, I mean, the guy will literally give you the
Wow.
shirt off his back.
But like you met them as a musician. I want to think that that was a large part of it too, though.
Yeah, well, what's funny is the flip side of that is, when they see me play even Brazilian music now, I'm a schmo.
Oh.
I don't play at the level that they do.
Oh.
I went down there, wanting to play samba, and I got to sit in, but the song that I played the most when I sat in with people, Hotel California.
That was
And
your
it was, it
thing.
was like, we're
Yeah.
gonna play Hotel California. Jeff's
You
in North
lived in
Carolina, come
California.
play. So there's your authenticity thing.
Uh-huh. Right. Oh, that's interesting.
But it's just that, again, no matter what I do, I present, like you said, as a 6'4" white guy, regardless, musician,
Hmm.
non-musician, whatever,
I
and can't get outside of that. And I just think that stuff is so entangled with how people deal. I mean, to be all nerdy, it's always already part of the picture. It's not the whole picture. And
Yeah.
and I don't want to be cynical, especially about
Mm.
them, but just to sort of realize that, I'm benefiting from these kinds of
Hmm.
identity politics on this side. It's
Yeah.
a sobering realization, but I think it's a really important one because I think everybody can think about that a little bit. So
Well, we could go on. I mean, music and race is one of your big topics, but we're going to have to probably draw this to a close. We haven't really explained to people that we're in a band called the Bulls. It's not really a band. I think we were a Beatles cover band, then we were like an 80s, 90s band. But when did the Bulls play again?
that's a really good question.
Yeah.
But I
I
think
know.
getting all together just to hang should happen much, much sooner than that, which I think that's in the works, right?
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to engaging in performances of our musical selves together. And
Yeah,
thank you so
man.
much. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. You do this really well, by the way. You got a future in broadcasting.
Oh, I have a past in
I know you have a
broadcasting.
long past in broadcasting, but
I
no,
have
this
a
is really
past.
fun.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon in person with the pint.
Sounds good.
Bye
Thanks a
for now.
lot. Bye-bye.
That was my conversation with Jeff Packman. His book is called Living for Music in Bahia: Professional Musicians, Popular Music, and the Capital of Afro-Brazil. In the show notes, you can find more information about the book and the music that we talked about, and those are available so far on Substack, the home of the show, on Spotify, on YouTube, not on iTunes yet, I don't think. Thanks so much for listening today. Thank you to Ali Burcock for the piano music that I use as my theme. I'm going to go out with a little jamming from Jeff Packman on drums and Sean Bellavidi on piano. Don't hate me, guys. Thanks again. Bye for now.